everybody. Welcome to another edition of Double Crossed Radio. This is your host, Chuck Horton. I'm coming to you live from, well, it wasn't so sunny today, but sunny Southern Oregon. Usually it's sunny. And I got a great show for you tonight, so stay tuned. I have to turn up my microphone a little bit here. There we go. That's probably a little better. Last week I wasn't able to be here. I was too successful in business. I had stuff up around my ears, and plus I was going to be on Vince Easley's show the next day, and I had stuff that I've been working on for his show and stuff that I've been working on for this show, and then I had Thursday happened, and I had no time to do anything, and by the time I got on to Vince's show the next morning, it's a good thing I could get up early in the morning and spend about 2 hours getting prepped for that, because I had nothing at 6 o'clock in the morning when I woke up, and by the time I was on with him, it was a lot of fun. Anyway, thank you, Vince, for having me on the show. It was awesome. I had a good time, and it was quite an honor to be asked. Tonight's show is going to be all about the Federal Reserve, and yeah, I know you're all turning off. Oh, it's time for me to go to bed. I have to get out of here. I don't want to listen about the Federal Reserve, but I'm a storyteller. This is going to be a story. This is going to be this is one you're going to want to record and put it in your own computer, an MP3 file, and cut a CD on it and put it in your CD player in your car and listen to it when you're driving around, because this is going to be a keeper. I promise. I was going to do this show last week. I just didn't have time to put it all together, and I didn't even have time. I didn't get home to get set up until it was about 7:45, which was 45 minutes into this show. But luckily we have a crack crew at UCY, mostly Jules, and she took care of things and played the previous week's show, which I thought was, I don't know how it was for you guys, but for me to do it, I learned so much in that show about Marie Curie and what an amazing person she was, and what a fabulous life she had, and how much all of us have benefited from the knowledge that she gained and imparted through her research, and how she changed science. That was just an incredible woman. I still today, I'm telling people about that show and things that were just amazing that she did in her lifetime. She actually struck down conventional wisdom, and when they told her she couldn't publish her paper, she said, well, screw you, I'm publishing it anyway. And she found someone who would publish it. And she proved that the atom was not the building block of the universe, that there were particles smaller than atoms. What an amazing woman. We don't have enough people like that in the world, and we should really appreciate and honor the ones that we do have. And too often we give honor and appreciation to scumbags like George W. Bush and Hillary Clinton and Barack Hussein Obama. I'm not a Muslim. Yeah, those people like that. Those people are scumbags, and they don't deserve our time, our effort, or our praise. Especially not the criminal Bush. Okay, so how did I come to choose all about the Federal Reserve as my topic for tonight? And there are a couple things going on. For about the past 3 weeks, there's been a buzz. There's been a buzz out there about the Federal Reserve. And are they going to raise rates, or are they going to leave them the same? What are they going to do? And all the investors were nervously wondering about what was going to happen. What's going to happen? And you go to any investment site or anybody that gives financial advice, and there's always something in there about the Fed, the meeting, the December 16th meeting is going to be a key thing. It's going to show what the direction is going to be for the future. Well, that's a bunch of crap. I think it's the Federal Reserve has no idea what's going on. If they did, they wouldn't have embarked on the plan of action that they've undertaken for the past 15 years. Or actually, let's just dial it all the way back to 1913. These people are laboring under the assumption that their economic theory is correct, even though it never ever works out the way it's supposed to. And they say, well, it's because it's a really complex science. That's a bunch of crap. That's an excuse. It never works because it's not a correct theory. And a lot of the things that it started out, they adopted pretty much what John Maynard Keynes said word for word. And one of the things he said was you couldn't have high unemployment and a recession at the same time. That you would either have, or inflation at the same time with high unemployment. That you'd either have one or the other. And you could manage your economy by, if you had high inflation, you could do some things to the economy would cause it to contract, and people would go, their jobs would be cut during the contraction, and so you'd have rising unemployment, but the inflation would be under control. And you could just jockey those two things back and forth, and you would always be in control of the economy, and you could just kind of play it like a fine violin or something. Well, guess what? In the 1980s, we had high inflation and high unemployment, something that John Maynard Keynes said was impossible. So people said, well, he didn't really mean impossible. He just said it was highly unlikely, or they did Paul Krugman dances around it, and they found out different ways to try and make up for this, or new computer analysis shows that, well, this was probably could happen. It's not a likely consequence, and and they had all these really complex math formulas that only brilliant mathematicians could understand. And what it really boiled down to is even those guys said, well, this doesn't make any sense, but they didn't ever get on the news because these people aren't well spoken. They don't know how to explain their ideas in language that anybody else can understand. They don't make good TV. They don't make good radio. So they got away with it. They got away explaining the 80s as just, well, it was an aberration, kind of something that, is a once in a lifetime thing, and it's probably not going to ever happen again. Well, it's happened again and again since then. And the Federal Reserve is just, they're run by a bunch of people who are slaves to two failed economic systems. One, the Keynesianism, and the second being the monetarists, who are from the Chicago School of Economics. So otherwise, I respect very much, except that they believe that this monetary theory that it really doesn't work. And I don't want to say things derogatory about Milton Friedman, because he's probably, aside from that one thing about monetarism, he's done a fantastic job of promoting the ideas of freedom and sound economical ideas other than monetary theory. But I guess no one's perfect, and he had his flaw is kind of a fatal one. So I don't want to celebrate him either. But what caused me to get so excited about this was the fact that so many people are just, they got their panties in a real tight wad about what is the Fed going to do? What is the Fed going to do? Well, yesterday the Fed did what they're going to do. They raised interest rates by 0.25%. Yes, I'm going to say it again. Just so they raised interest rates by 0.25%, and this was an action that people were wondering if they were going to do this or not for 2 or 3 weeks prior to the event. And I said, oh, wow, how can something? I mean, if we look at this analytically, there's a few things that are a consequence of this. The United States is $20 trillion in debt, 0.25%. On that, see, like 10% would be 2 trillion, 1% would be 200 billion, 0.1% would be 20 billion, 0.25% is about $50 billion. So that's going to increase our deficit by $50 billion a year, just that 0.25% increase. And the people that are monetarists say, so what? We'll just print more money. And the people that are the Keynesians say that we need that because we have to have a liquid market. We can't have this illiquidity. We can't have frozen assets. We can't. They have a bunch of garbage terms for it. The Austrians, the only ones that really understand what's going on, say yes, there is no easy way out of this. We either have to inflate our way to death, or we can actually have a planned contraction of the economy through raising interest rates. Let interest rates be set by market forces instead of by arbitrary constraints by unelected bureaucrats who face no real financial consequence for their actions. I mean, if we had real economic statistics and their pay was based on whether those real economic statistics, not the fake ones that the government puts out, but the real ones, were improving or getting worse. And if they're getting worse, they'd have cuts in pay, and if they're improving, then they would get paid more. Well, in that situation, they would have done this a long time ago when it would have really done some good. It's too late now. There's no way out. They painted themselves in a corner. There's no way out. Whichever way they go, it's going to be very painful. And I'm not going to, we've been talking about this since the inception of this show, how it's going to happen soon. It's going to happen. We had Jeff Berwick on. He said, well, probably within 10 years, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was within 2, and it could happen tomorrow. And here it is 3 years later. It looks like this is the start of it. If interest rates were allowed to go to what you would consider I think we would call it a market level of interest, it would probably end up somewhere around 8%. So interest on a debt, a $20 trillion debt, interest on a debt would be more, it would actually double our annual deficit spending, more than double our annual deficit spending. It would add $1.6 trillion of debt every year. Debt. This is money we already don't have enough money to pay what we spend. We're going in debt over $1 trillion a year. This would add $1.6 trillion in addition to that. And that's where the normal cost of money is, because interest is like a clock. Interest makes people realize that money today is worth more than money tomorrow. And so you pay a premium to get it today rather than wait until tomorrow. And that premium is interest. So when you want to buy a house, you can save your money for 20 years and buy a house, or you can borrow it and pay interest on that, because the money today lets you live in that house for 20 years while you pay that debt back. So that's what interest is. It's a function. It functions like a clock. So I'm just wondering if anybody ever really thinks about some of these things. I know I didn't give it a lot of thought before we had Jeff Berwick on as a guest, and he pointed out that even a 2% rise in interest rates would cripple the U.S. economy for a long time. And, no one has brought this up in any discussion I've talked to anybody about the effect on the U.S. debt that the raise in interest rates is going to make. It's been over 24 hours since they've done this, and I haven't heard or seen one headline to this effect. Now, I haven't read or listened to everybody that's had some comment about it, so it's possible that some people have brought it up, but nobody in the mainstream media has. And then we do have those people that are running for public office, and some of them are really smart and some of them are really stupid, Hillary Clinton. And so anyway, we have one of them who I can think is a really smart man, is Senator Ted Cruz from Texas. And I think, he's probably genius IQ. He's just a really good debater. He's very eloquent. His words come to him like numbers come to me. He's a very effective speaker. He can kind of get you to believe in almost anything that comes out of his mouth because he's such a good talker. But if you can read what he says instead of listening to him, and you read the words, you start to see, wait a minute, this guy doesn't know anything about economics. He thinks that the monetarists are right. He thinks that the Fed is causing this because they have too tight of a monetary policy. Are you kidding me? 0% interest rates are too tight of a monetary policy? The Fed caused this with those loose monetary policy. The 0% interest rate is what's caused this economic predicament. And this is the quality. This has got one of the leading candidates for office, and he and Donald Trump are like Dumb and Dumber, economically speaking. They just don't get it. I just don't understand how we could have come to this point in time and have such an uneducated electorate to people, and we have dummies choosing our leaders, and we wonder why we choose such crappy leaders. Maybe that literacy test to be able to vote wasn't such a bad idea back when, except they used it as a means to keep blacks down because they wouldn't let them go to school. So of course they couldn't read or write. It was against the law to let them read anything or let them learn to read. Yeah, so let's not strike down that law that keeps them from learning how to read. Let's just make those literacy tests or qualifications for voting illegal. Well, if you would have allowed more freedom and let them learn like everybody else does, they would have loved to have learned to read and write so they could vote. That wouldn't have been a problem then. And then we'd still have a literate electorate. Instead, we let it be used as a weapon of racism. I shared a link today on our Facebook page about this story, the Mises Institute. Robert Murphy did an analysis. It did tight Fed policy caused the financial crisis. And he kind of laid into Ted Cruz a little bit, and he had a great run of comments. But this was his conclusion at the end. It has been said that in Austrian theory, monetary factors cause the business cycle, but real phenomena constitute it. In his conical treatment, Ludwig von Mises certainly admitted that the commercial banks, through their policies of credit contraction and interest rate movements, could influence the precise timing of a crash. However, once an unsustainable boom was underway, let's read that again. Once an unsustainable boom was underway, a crash was inevitable. It would be foolish to think that a recession was due to merely the unwillingness of banks to continue with monetary inflation and artificially low interest rates. It would be foolish to think that a recession was due merely to the unwillingness of banks to continue with monetary inflation and artificially low interest rates. I'm not saying these things twice because I'm trying to stretch the show to fill an hour. This is important. The crash that we're about to experience right now is going to be very painful. Some people will lose everything they have. Some people will just be lucky and only lose their house, and they'll still have a job and they'll be able to rebuild their lives. Other people are going to be out in the streets. They're going to be homeless. It's going to break up families. It's going to impoverish children. It's going to shut down schools. It's going to crowd our classrooms. It's going to crimp our style in every which way you could think possible. And what causes this? It was caused by loose monetary policy that allowed an unsustainable boom to be created. In other words, the actions of the Federal Reserve prior to 2000, first it caused a bubble in the stock market. When that bubble exploded, in order to reinflate that bubble, they pumped more money into the economy via lower interest rates, which allowed an unsustainable boom to take place in the housing market. And all sorts of people were blamed for this crash, saying it was greedy Americans out there flipping houses and trying to make money out of nothing, like the Federal Reserve does. No, they were just reading the tea leaves, the economic tea leaves, as they had been artificially placed by the Federal Reserve, saying it's a smart thing to take this free money and to leverage it through properties and overbuild and overflip and everything else that they did with real estate and cause a bubble to be created, which crashed and did a tremendous amount of damage to our economy. Well, now we have another bubble in the stock market, which was started shortly after our show began. We told people, well, we didn't think you should be in the stock market. It was kind of a fixed game. It's a rigged game. We didn't, and the stock market kept going up, so it looked like we were wrong. But we said, well, it could go up for as long as this takes, as long as this situation continues, but it will crash. And that day is approaching very shortly. And for those of you who are just know how to play the game, know how the game's played, you see that, well, I put my money in, I made some money, and it's time to get out. And let me tell you that when this crashes, it's going to crash very quickly. You're not going to have a chance to get out. You're going to call your broker and say, "Get me out," and maybe several thousand points later, you're out. So, anyway, conservative analysts say that this crash is coming soon. It's going to eliminate 50% of the equity in stock market, 40% of the equity in homes, 30% of savings. And I'm thinking, what do they mean 30% of savings? This is a bank account. That's my money in there. No. Banks are going to fail. People are going to lose 30% of their hard cash savings in banks. If you want to prevent that, if you want to prevent losing 30, and this isn't going to be everyone's going to lose the same amount. Some people are going to lose everything. Other people will be lucky enough to be, and that'll be dumb luck because I sure don't know if my bank's healthy or not. They don't publish any statistics of how good your bank is. So some banks will skate through and their customers will all be fine. Others are going down in flames and they're going to take everybody with them. That's just how it is. So you might want to start doing some research on the health of your banking business or the place where you do your banking. Excuse me. Just remember that before the last crash, which was in 2007, 2008, Lehman Brothers was thought to be a really stable financial institution. They went down in flames. They took a lot of people with them. For almost all my life, Lehman Brothers was one of the big boys. And when you worked for them, you were working for one of the primary financial institutions. They were one of the top banks in the world. I think they owned a percentage of the Federal Reserve. Apparently, they pissed somebody off and they took them down. So, the monetary policies of the Federal Reserve, they are responsible for the mess we're in. And they're not responsible for the mess not being corrected because there's nothing that the Federal Reserve can do to correct this mess. Only free markets can rebuild an economy. You can't artificially try and do it. It has to be something that is done through voluntary actions of people who want to trade. You can't force actions on people and expect it to be something that's workable. That's why fascism and socialism and communism don't work, is because they have to force people to do stuff. And so they're not real economic systems. They're just like basically different forms of totalitarian rule. Okay. So here we are. Just how did we end up getting stuck with the Federal Reserve? Any of you people out there listening know how this story goes? Well, there's an excellent book on this. It's called The Creature from Jekyll Island. And it's all about all the underhanded skullduggery and criminal actions and everything that took place to get the Federal Reserve formed. And there was criminal action both by the banks and by the politicians involved. And that's just what happened. But I have here a kind of introductory statement about this. I printed out some stuff and I didn't have time to highlight everything. It's in really small print, so I have to kind of hold it away from me as I talk here. Okay, this is an excerpt from the New York Times, Christmas Eve, 1913. This is after the Federal Reserve had been authorized by Congress. And I say authorized in quotation marks because it was not a quorum and it's not a legal action. And I don't know how they pulled this off, and nobody ever. I guess people were afraid to go against these people because they tend to play hardball, meaning they'll end your life prematurely if you don't go along. So here's the New York Times. Quote, "The Christmas spirit pervaded the gathering. While the ceremony was a little less impressive than that of signing the Tariff Act on October 3rd, last in the same room, the spectators were much more enthusiastic and seized every occasion to applaud." Well, certainly that tells us exactly what went on. Sounds like a something from the socialite page or something about so-and-so is marrying so-and-so. There in the White House that fateful December evening, President Wilson signed away the last veneer of control over American money supply to a cartel, a well-organized gang of crooks, so successful, so cunning, so well hidden, that even now, a century later, few know of its existence, let alone the details of its operations. Yeah, those operations are hidden and sealed, and we can't see them. Ron Paul was just, all he wanted to do was audit them, and they pretty much used their money and their control to have him blackballed, and the reporters that even mentioned his name lost their jobs. It's pretty amazing. They say finishing first in the thing was so-and-so, and in third place, a strong third place was so-and-so, and in fourth place was so-and-so, and then looking strong, coming out of nowhere into fifth place was so-and-so, and who was that second place guy again that they skipped? Oh, yeah, it'd be Ron Paul, who was like less than 1% behind the guy that won. And I don't know. That's how they did it. And that was because he was after them. And I'm kind of glad Ron Paul didn't get elected, because had he been elected, I'm sure they would have assassinated him like they assassinated Kennedy. Oh yeah, I've said it. I've said it. I accuse the Federal Reserve, working in collaboration with the CIA, to be responsible for the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. There you go. I've said it. I can't prove it, but that's what I believe happened. That is my sincere belief. And by the way, the guy that ran that operation with CIA was George Herbert Walker Bush, who claimed he wasn't in Dallas, even though photos prove he was. So he's lying to cover up something. Okay, so anyway, this was 1913. That was a bad year. That was a year that the state legislatures lost the right to pick their senators. So the senators became elected by popular vote. And what this did was that the state legislatures were generally pretty good at looking after the self-interests of the state. In the United States as a whole, I think that's healthy. And yeah, sure, they want to get something that's good for them at everybody else's expense, but so does everybody else. So not a lot got done that was hurtful to anybody, because it would have to also be beneficial to a majority of the states as well, and that was unlikely to be the case. So if a senator started to look like he was being bought by some cartel, the state legislatures could call him back immediately and replace him with someone else. And so the Senate, being 1/3 of that body that needed to be there to pass the law, it made control of the Senate very difficult for this cartel. They could control the representatives because those were elected by popular vote, and they only had to control a majority of them. They don't have to control all of them. They just had to have a majority. In the Senate, they had to have, I think, 60 votes. So they had to be able to break the word just jumped out of my head. But it's when you just talk and talk and talk, what do you call it? Whatever they call that. You guys know what I'm talking about. It's like me. When I just talk and talk and talk here, I'm doing that. So back to the subject, the banking industry now had the ability to buy enough votes to get to get whatever they wanted, pretty much, and they were able to run the system the way they needed to do it. And they said that, I mean, their intent, at least their published intent, was that they were trying to prevent financial panics that had happened periodically throughout the 19th century. Now, these financial panics, while they were devastating to some individuals, in general, they were small and localized, and they involved a single bank with maybe some branch offices, and were not really lethal or dangerous or fatal to the total economy of the country. They would only be harmful for small regions of the country at a time, because banking was basically a free market activity up until then. And if you had I don't think there were even regional banks. There were state banks, and that was about it. So maybe a state would suffer, but the surrounding states generally would, oh, well, too bad for you. And they would learn from their example, and they would try and have better banking supervision and laws concerning that, and so on and so forth. And they, because there was a lot of them out there, it actually was a pretty healthy system. There were some things that were a little cumbersome, and I'm sure having a central bank supposedly streamlined some of those things. But the one thing that has happened since the creation of the Federal Reserve is they have debased the currency of the United States. Notice I don't say money, because the Federal Reserve note is not money, it's currency. Money has to be supported and backed by something. But they have debased the currency of the United States, destroyed 98% of the purchasing power of that currency in the 100 years it's been in existence. Now, when I've told this story before, I'm going to tell it again because it's the truth, and it's a simple story, and a lot of people will have no trouble understanding what goes on in this. When I first entered the workforce at age 16, it's in 1967, the minimum wage for working in farm labor, which I was working in, was $1.10 an hour. Plus, I was thinning pear trees. I got paid 10 cents a tree, and I could do about 20 trees in a day. So, in a day, I would make $8.80 in wages and an extra $2 for the trees that I thinned. I would make $10.80. And you guys are saying, wow, that's slave wages. But there were a lot of silver coins still in circulation in 1967. So it's possible that I could get my whole paycheck in silver coins. Those silver coins today would be worth over $20. So I was getting paid over $20 an hour for a minimum wage job in today's dollars. And what is the minimum wage today? It varies from state to state. In Oregon, where I live, it's pretty close to $10 an hour, but in some states it's still whatever the federal minimum wage is, which is much less. Or at least less. Some places it's $15 an hour. There isn't any place in the United States where it's $20 an hour. So what has happened is, through the debasement of the currency, the Federal Reserve has stolen the value of the people's labor. People produce more today than they produced in 1967 because of machinery and advanced techniques, advanced planting techniques. You don't have to use ladders so much. You can do a lot of the thinning just walking on the ground. You can do a lot more work than you could do and accomplish a lot more. One person can do a lot more than they could do in 1967. Yet we're paid less for increased productivity. How does that happen? It happens through the debasement of the currency. That you're producing more wealth, but that wealth is being siphoned off by the Federal Reserve. They get the money first. They get to buy hard assets with it, and by the time you get it, the money doesn't have the purchasing power that it did when they got it. And to me, that's a crime. These people should hang. And I mean that. I'm not threatening violence. I'm saying these are crimes like this are treason against the state. And there's a punishment for treason. I believe it's public hanging. And that's what I'm saying, that they should be publicly prosecuted for the crime of treason. Certainly there's a lot of people working out there, and you can't live. I mean, I have a lot of empathy for people that demonstrate in the streets and they want a living wage and all that. They don't understand who's taking that living wage away from them. You know, as a kid, I grew up in a single parent family. But my mother, she wasn't rich. She didn't make a lot, but she made enough money that she was able to purchase a house and support 2 children on her own. And we didn't have a lot of stuff, but I mean, we didn't go without. What she did would be almost impossible today. So we also live in an age where computers, machinery, advances in technologies should make everything that we buy less expensive than it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago. Certainly in my lifetime, for a nickel, I used to be able to buy 5 sticks of gum. It should be cheaper now, not more expensive. Why would anyone change their production methods to make things so they cost more money for the marketplace? If you want to have a bigger share of the marketplace, you try and find ways to put things on the market for less money. Why do prices have to go up then? It seems like, well, it's not because the people making the gum are greedy. Well, maybe some of them are, but I mean, if you are, someone else is not going to be so greedy. They're going to be a little smarter. They're going to put it out there at a cheaper price, and the price of gum will come down in price. And it won't go up. It goes up because the purchasing power of the dollar is gone. That money is part of the wealth that you produce with your labor, the wealth that we produce with the machines we use, the computers. All that wealth is being stolen by the Federal Reserve. These are bank robbers, real bank robbers, and they work in banks. Now, moving on a little bit more. By the way, the author of this book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, is G. Edward Griffin, and a while back he was interviewed by Jeff Berwick on Anarchast, and that's a fabulous interview, and you should all watch that one. But you should also buy the book and read it. And if you don't buy it and read it, someday you'll wake up and say, wow, that guy was talking about that on that radio show on UCY, and I never thought that I thought he was crazy. I thought he was just a nutcase, and he was right, and it'll be too late by then. When it becomes so obvious that everybody can see it, you'll already be in a chain that you can't break. And so I think that day is going to happen in my lifetime. I'm 64 years old. I expect to live quite a while longer. I'm in good health, but I think it could happen in the next 5 years. I expect to live quite a bit longer than that. The banks don't produce anything except printed money. The Federal Reserve exists on the wealth produced by the American taxpayer. The interest on the debt, which every dollar that they create, a Federal Reserve note is an instrument of debt. Every dollar they create has an interest payment due on it every year. And the income tax was instituted in the same year that the Federal Reserve was authorized, and it was also passed under some really controversial circumstances which were never investigated because everybody was afraid to go against these people because they play hardball. But the income tax was instituted to pay the interest on the debt. And that's the truth. So your taxes that you do every year to send into our government, you think your taxes are building roads, and you think they're building bridges, you think they're supporting the troops in overseas. No. The taxes pay the interest on the debt. The fact that Congress spends more money than we produce in taxes, that's meaningless. that they're encouraged to do that by the bankers because they want to loan them more money so they can create more interest payments to them. So that your taxes go up with the deficit spending, and you become enslaved with bigger and bigger chains as this happens. Oh, I got an incoming call. Hang on just a moment. Keep those thoughts in mind. I'll be right back. Okay, that was fan mail from some flounder, to quote Bullwinkle. So we have a case. I'm building my case against the Federal Reserve, and if you're not getting mad by now, if you're not seeing how they've stolen your life, your future from you, I don't know how else I can spell it out to you. But maybe you could read the book. G. Edward Griffith does a pretty good job. I think I've broken it down a little simpler. If you just use your brain, I know that you guys, if you're listening to this show, you've probably got a bigger brain than most, because you're not being swayed by that propaganda from TV. But just why do you think some cartel of bankers should be granted a monopoly over the creation of money or currency? There can be no competing currency. The Federal Reserve is it. And Woodrow Wilson, he signed this into law, and he saw that, oh, this was a mistake. I shouldn't have done this. And what happened? I think they gave him something that caused him to have a stroke. Warren G. Harding, he wasn't a real admirable person. He had a lot of personality flaws. He was kind of a womanizer, and he had a lot of cronies that, he was whatever. He wasn't typically what you would call a person without faults, but economically speaking, he was probably one of the best presidents of the 20th century, and he got us out of a recession or depression that was much worse than the Great Depression, started in 1929, and he did it by just cutting federal spending 50%. Well, that really pissed off the old Federal Reserve, because what happens when you cut federal spending? It means there's no more debt. It means taxes go down. It means they can't steal the wealth of the American laborer through taxation, through debasement of currency. They can't print more money because there's no federal spending going on. They've reduced it by so much. They were out of that depression in 18 months. In fact, may have been even faster than that, but some of the economic statistics kind of lag behind the reality. Well, it looks like good old Warren G. Harding was poisoned. Some people theorize it was his wife who was jealous and like a woman scorned. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. But I think she knew all about that from the beginning. She was there for being able to ride in on the coattails of her man. She was the first lady. She was enjoying all that, and she didn't really enjoy him that much anyway. She just wanted the association, and so she didn't care that he had, she was like a lot of presidents get to the White House and just kind of go crazy, horn dogs, I guess you'd call them. But he died in office, replaced by silent Calvin Coolidge. And then they got their man Hoover in, and they were able to, to do some economic warfare on things. And I actually think some of the people that working in the Fed at that time were just useful idiots. And the people really driving the conversation, though, they knew what they were doing. They're doing this purposefully, and they did it to punish America. Or they knew that it was a consequence of the monetary inflation that took place during the 1920s, the Roaring '20s, the artificially stimulated economy created by loose money policies, which even the great Milton Friedman couldn't figure out. But Murray Rothbard did. And I read his book, America's Great Depression. You should also read it. It is not an easy read. But once you read it, you'll realize, holy crap, they did this on purpose. And if they didn't, how did they get in these positions of power? Because they're too stupid to figure this stuff out. they were always trying to figure out ways to hide what they were doing, so that to a lot of people it wasn't evident. Murray Rothbard figured out what they were doing. Then we go fast forward to the 1960 election, and John F. Kennedy wins in a real close election against Richard Nixon, who, and by the way, both those fellows were very close friends. They had offices across the hall in the Senate, or in the Congress, excuse me. Maybe in the Senate afterwards, after Nixon became a senator, or maybe it was before when they were in their house. Anyway, they had offices close to each other, and they socially knew each other, and they liked each other very well. However, Kennedy was the winning candidate, and Kennedy just didn't seem to he was having trouble getting things done the way he wanted in Washington, and he realized at the start that the Federal Reserve was it's a fraudulent organization, and he started to print money, U.S. Treasury bills. Looked like the Federal Reserve notes, only they didn't say Federal Reserve on them anywhere. They were actually money backed by silver. And he had a lot of $5 bills printed, and he was working on some $10 bills. Some of the $5 bills had been released into circulation. I saw one the other day. Very, very interesting piece of history. And he was planning to replace all the U.S. Federal Reserve notes with U.S. Treasury bills that were actually backed by silver, that were actually a money instead of a currency. And he was really upset with the CIA for how they had sabotaged the Bay of Pigs and screwed that up, cost him a lot of political currency. And he was calling for investigations into this and that. Well, what do you know? He goes to Dallas, and all of a sudden he gets shot. And we've covered the assassination of Kennedy on this show. And you guys, if you're loyal listeners, you know that it couldn't possibly have happened the way the Warren Commission says it happened, which makes me think that the people in the Warren Commission were handpicked by the Federal Reserve people, the people that run all these banks, the elite that have this small social club that run the world. And let me tell you something, they're not going to let you in this club no matter how much money you make in your life. They're only going to let you in if you have the willpower to screw your fellow man the way they do. So anyway, I'm beyond a shadow of doubt. I believe that because he was instituting this currency, this money, which would replace the currency that the Federal Reserve had issued, that for that reason that he was going to take down the Fed, that he was assassinated. Let's fast forward to Ronald Reagan's presidency. Now, Ronald Reagan, when he was elected, he was a hard-talking, fast-charging guy, and I don't think he changed. I think he was shot. The doctors gave him cold blood in his transfusion, which gave him some brain damage, which was later said to be Alzheimer's, but I believe it was the cold blood that caused some brain damage that the deterioration once it started could not be stopped. And it may have just been a lucky coincidence for those people and it was Alzheimer's. Who knows? But we also have been told, all of our listeners on this show, that Alzheimer's is a physician-caused disease. It's caused by statin drugs, which eliminate cholesterol from our bloodstream. Cholesterol is the building block for many things in your body, including myelin, which is a key substance for a healthy functioning brain. And when myelin disappears in the brain, we have senility sets in. So it could have been that they just gave him some medical prescriptions, and it was the doctor that did him in. He was paid handsomely to keep his mouth shut. And when money isn't enough, they can also threaten to kill your family and stuff. I mean, there's been a lot of doctors lately who've committed suicide and these suicidal doctors had one thing in common. They were all very much against vaccines. Wow. Who would have seen that? So, now, my talk about the Federal Reserve is drawing to a close. I got a few minutes left here, and I want to kind of try and sum this all up. They've been in existence for 101 years now. During this 101 years, they have constructed a chain which they use to bind you to their will. It's a chain slave, or a slave chain, and it's constructed out of paper. Not metal, paper. And yet these chains bind us so tightly that we seem like we have no choice but to comply. By the way, Otto, thank you for your comment about the myelin. Myelin also, it accounts for over 70% of your brain matter. So just to let people know, it's not just the sheath around the nerves. It keeps the nerves from short-circuiting, basically. Anyway, back to this. The Federal Reserve, in 101 years, they have constructed a prison. And they're putting the final pieces in place as we speak. They support candidates to run for office that say they're going to build a wall around the United States. Well, man, in an age when you can jump on a plane and go somewhere, how effective is a wall going to be to keep people in or out of your country? I mean, it's probably going to be more effective keeping people in your country if you don't let them get on board a plane. But once they've got on board a plane, they could come in anytime they want. They could find a place to land. So I think the walls are there to keep people in. They're not to keep people out, because it doesn't seem they'd be too effective. They're not going to work along a beach. You can put up a 10-foot wall all around the whole country that people can come in. They can come in by boats, but if you don't let people get on boats once they're here, well, yeah, you could use that wall to keep people in, but the wall won't keep people out. Are you starting to get the picture? And not only are they doing it this way, they are bringing in the scum of the earth to this country so that people will be begging for a wall to keep these people out, not realizing that the wall's being built to keep them in. They're going to have all sorts of incidents of tragic incidents where people are mass killings, or where people just get guns and just start mowing down people for no apparent reason, or maybe because of their Christian faith. And people would be begging for stronger gun laws, be begging for more intrusive spying to find these people before they commit these kinds of actions before. They'll be begging for their own, for the intrusions into their own lives. Do you see how they work this? I have no doubt that the Federal Reserve is a criminal organization. Just because people wear expensive suits and drive around in limousines and smoke cigars behind closed doors wherever they wish and live lavish lifestyles, it doesn't make them right. If they're selling Shinola and if they're selling shit and telling you it's Shinola, they're crooks. They're selling currencies, telling you it has value, it has no value. It isn't even worth. It wouldn't even make good toilet paper. It's not soft and absorbent, and it probably wouldn't be a good cleaning agent when you wipe your rear end. Okay. That's the show tonight. And I hope that you guys can take the things I said tonight and spread these messages to people if you have their ear, and to continue to spread this message of of how the Federal Reserve is destroying our lives. Because let me tell you, we're winning this battle. In 2006, in a survey conducted by the Harris Poll, less than 10% of the people in the United States even knew that there was a Federal Reserve. And by 2012, when Ron Paul was running for president, 80% of the people in this country wanted to audit the Federal Reserve. In just 6 years, we had that big of a change. It isn't time to stop. Just because Ron Paul isn't running for office, it doesn't mean it's time to stop talking about these issues. The Federal Reserve is the key to everything that's killing this country. You want to lower taxes? Get rid of the Federal Reserve. You want to get out of wars? End the Federal Reserve. You want to stop this intrusive government from creating all these things that really do, they impact your lives in a negative manner? Get rid of the Federal Reserve. You're tired of deficit budgets and excessive federal spending? Get rid of the Federal Reserve. It's the same answer to all these problems. If you end the Fed, I guarantee you this country's economy will straighten out and start to perform. Because the people who live in this country, they have instilled in them the blood of their parents and generations before them. They have a love of liberty and freedom that just doesn't exist in a lot of places on earth. They wouldn't have come here if they didn't have that. We're a country of refugees from all over the world that came here with just one thing that they wanted. They wanted to be left alone. They wanted to live their lives in freedom. And there's still, most of the people who live here have that instinct in them. It's passed on through their, I don't know if it's genetic, but it's there. But as long as there's a Federal Reserve, that dream will never be realized. The American dream will be a dream only. It won't be a reality. So, signing off for tonight. The music's going to start any second. Thank you for listening. Be sure and support the people that support this show. Support the UCY network. Support the guests that we have on, like Jordan Page, like Mary Ruwart. I just received her book this week, Healing Our World. What an amazing book. It's going to be a Christmas present for my mom. Mom, if you're listening, I hope it didn't spoil the surprise. I'll see you guys next week. It'll be Christmas Eve, and I think it'll be a replay of this show. So tune in, and you can listen to it again. Thanks a lot. See you later. Bye.